part of the Islamic tradition. There are many different components that form the Sharia law, but first we're going to talk about the origins. According to Muslim tradition, there is no historical development of Islamic law. All major concepts of law or rules are believed to come directly from Muhammad and passed on through generations. Another source that shapes the behavior of the people is Muhammad's followers. Muhammad's life and what he did was taken as a model. This information was put into writing, passed on to the succeeding generation. This was known as the Hadith. The Quran and the Hadith are believed to be the two most important components that form Sharia law. Early on, there was a need to establish the baselines of behavior, and so there were disputes in early Muslim communities. This gradually developed into study circles where independent scholars met to learn from the local master and discuss religious topics. When the circles had first formed, the relationships were fluid, but over time, these gradually formed into distinct legal schools shaped around a uniform set of methodological ideals. As the difference between these schools of law became defined, the authority became vested in the master jurist, who would be identified as the founder. Within the first 3 centuries of Islam, all legal schools came to accept the broad outlines of classical legal theory, based on which Islamic law was firmly rooted in the Quran and the Hadith.
In Islam, the people take Muslim customs and health seriously, so there are laws about their diet, their hygiene, and what they should say before their everyday activities. For dietary laws during the month of Ramadan, Muslims can't eat or drink between dawn and sunset. This does not apply to young children, pregnant women, weak people, or travelers. In that month, it ends with a big meal and it is celebrated with special prayers, gathering of families and friends, and special meals. For hygiene and purification, purification has a physical and spiritual one. It is believed that activities in contact with impure animals and substances can cause impurity, and to achieve purification, water is used for that, and there's also used in some occasions. Muslims must clean their sins before praying or performing other rituals. For hygiene, it includes clipping mustaches, cutting nails, circumcising their sons, cleaning nostrils and mouth and teeth, and also cleaning their body. For the customs, saying Bismillah, which means in the name of God, before eating and drinking is one of the customs. And using the right hand while eating and drinking is another one. There's others like saying Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you when meeting someone, and answering with Wa alaikum salam, which means peace be upon you. There's another one called Alhamdulillah, which is a way of saying bless you when someone sneezes, and you reply with Yerham Mukala after that. The last one is saying Arhan to a newborn in the right ear and Ikama in the left ear. There are also laws about economic and marriage laws in Islam. Sharia laws are also enforced in many different ways, and there are also law schools established by Muslims. For the economic laws, all Muslims who can support themselves have to pay taxes or alms, known as zakat. It is similar to the US Social Security or UK National Insurance. Money is given to the poor in the community, and the amount is calculated by the amount of wealth a Muslim has. There is no fixed rate stated in the Quran, but it's generally practiced at 2.5%. All property owned by a person is all owned by God, and Islamic banking and financing are partnerships between customers and institutions. For marriage laws, the Quran allows men to marry multiple women, but does not encourage it. It is only permitted in certain conditions, such as when a husband dies and the wife is abandoned. It is uncommon to see a man with multiple wives, but if a man is seen with more than one wife, then it is because his first wife isn't able to produce a child. For enforcement, an example would be mutawin, which is a police enforcement, which is a government authorized religious police of Saudi Arabia. There's also guidance police, which is the main Islamic religious police force in Iran, and enforcement of Islamic values in accordance with Sharia is the responsibility of Polisi Perda. Sharia Islam, which is in Indonesia, the Committee of Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice in Palestine, and Basiji Force in Iran. The Hisba, which is a historic doctrine which means accountability, holds that it is an obligation for every Muslim to report to their superiors about anything bad that someone is doing. It is an important duty as it keeps order within the community, and it allows any Muslims to tell on anyone that does something that offends the Islam society. Is an example be Egypt and Pakistan, which they use this method to bring charges against the apostates. For the law schools, the main Sunni schools of law are Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali madhabs, which means school of law. The first century of Islam also had a number of small Sunni law schools, which are now gone. An example would be the Zahiri school. So today in law schools, legal practice in most of the Muslim world has been controlled by the government policy and state law. So then the influence of the schools beyond personal ritual practices depend on the statutes accorded to them within the national legal system.
Sharia law is a controversial and important religious law that forms part of the Islamic tradition. According to Muslim tradition, there is no historical development of Islamic law. All major concepts of law or rules are believed to come directly from Muhammad and passed on through generations. Another source that shapes the behavior of the people is Muhammad's followers. Muhammad's life and what he did was taken as a model. This information was put into writing to be passed on to the succeeding generation. There was a need to establish the baselines of behavior, and so there were disputes in the early Muslim communities. This gradually developed into study circles where independent scholars met to learn from the local master and discuss religious topics. When the circles had first formed, the relationships were fluid, but over time these gradually formed into distinct legal schools shaped around a uniform set of methodological ideas. As the difference between the schools of law became defined, the authority became vested in the master jurist, who would be identified as the founder. Within the first 3 centuries of Islam, all legal schools came to accept the broad outlines of classical legal theory, based on what Islamic law was firmly rooted in.
Now, for the dress code, men has to have their body be covered from knee to waist, and women must cover every part of their body except their face and hands. People should not care a lot about their looks, but more in their honesty and spiritual beliefs. Religion does not want people to become prostitutes or anything sexual that attracts others. Men are required to keep their guard up, while men have to, quote-unquote, protect themselves. For freedom of speech, Article 22A of the Declaration states that everyone shall have the right to express his or her opinion freely in such a manner as will not be contrary to the principles of Sharia. Profanity in Islam is any form of questioning or offending God, Muhammad, or an angel, or anything considered sacred in religion. Punishment ranges from imprisonment to hanging or beheading. Non-Muslims who get punished can escape it by converting to Islam.
The first myth is that Sharia is Islamic law. Sharia isn't even law in the sense that we in the West understand it. Most devout Muslims who embrace Sharia don't think of it as a substitute for civil law. It is an outline based on the Quran that guides Muslims toward living an Islamic life. It doesn't come from the state, and it doesn't come from one book or a single collection of rules. Sharia is divine and philosophical. Human interpretation of Sharia is called fiqh, or Islamic rules of right action, created by scholars based on the Quran or the Hadith. The second myth is in Muslim countries, Sharia is the law of the land. Fiqh authority was separate from government power during pre-modern Muslim times. After colonialism, this joint authority would be carried over. This results in using state power to create Muslim theocracies with the movement toward regulating Sharia law. The third myth is that Sharia is anti-woman. There are many stereotypes and interpretations that Muslims are against women because of the strict marriage laws and head coverings. There is a verse in the Quran that holds men as the protectors of women, but many present-day scholars interpret it as men have the power over women and they are inferior. Many of the laws that are against women have no association in fiqh. This means these laws are purely made by the government and have no ties to Sharia law. Fiqh doctrine says a woman's property held exclusively in her name cannot be appropriated by her husband, brother, or father, which is in contrast to the property rights of women in Europe. The fourth myth is that Islam demands brutal punishments. The Islamic State is the worst place to look to understand what Sharia says about punishment and the treatment of innocents and prisoners. It is true that Sharia permits harsh corporal punishment, including amputation of limbs, but fiqh restricts its application. The fifth and final myth is Sharia is about conquest. There is no such duty to wage war. The Quran repeatedly commands Muslims to keep promises and uphold covenants. Fiqh scholars have always insisted that Muslims in non-Muslim lands must obey the laws of those lands. As you can see, Sharia law is far more than the stereotypical extremist law most people view it as.